Not yours.
All right. So my thesis, Salmon and Home, Understanding an Integrated Classroom and Field Trip Program in Washington State through Multiple Perspectives. So to briefly summarize the entire field of environmental education research, studies tend to show generally positive outcomes from environmental education programs. This is typically environmental knowledge combined with a number of other competencies that can be categorized into the four that you see up here. These typically include things like critical thinking, communication, values towards the environment, appreciation of local areas, or even just enjoyment, among many others. So with this variety of outcomes, you have a wide variety of programs and ways that these programs are designed. And the difference between the programs is heightened even more when you have all of the different environments that we have in this country and many different student bodies that we have as well that participate. So in the context of accountability to educational standards, it's really important to be able to demonstrate measurable outcomes and understand the characteristics of a program that lead to these outcomes. So the problem becomes that when you have all of these different programs that measure different things in different environments, designed differently and have different students participating, it becomes really hard to compare the programs. So this is a really big problem. It's not something I'm going to be able to take care of in a master's thesis, but this quote comes from a group of researchers who's working on this problem. We encourage researchers performing program evaluations to focus on providing additional details of the programs they evaluate, using retrospective qualitative interviews to contribute to the overall effort of understanding not only if environmental education works, but also why and how it works. So this is a big motivation for how I went about my study. The program I looked at is the Salmon Heroes program, which is offered by the Environmental Science Center. It's aimed at 4th through 8th grade students in South King County. And it aims to teach them the basics of salmon life cycles and pollution threats with a focus on urban environments where they live. It's structured, as you can see here, with a 1-hour introductory lesson that's in the classroom, a 3-hour field trip that's to a local stream that's different based on where the school is, and then a 1-hour synthesis lesson that's back in the classroom. This happens over the course of 2 to 3 weeks in the fall so that students can ideally see spawning salmon. ESC collects pre and post assessment data every year. It's administered by the teachers, and this is part of the data that I used. So my research questions and approach. First question is, to what extent do students achieve the learning outcomes of the Salmon Heroes program? I answer this first through statistical testing of the pre-post knowledge assessments. This comes from 983 assessments that ESC collected, and this is out of around 3,300 students who participated in the program this year. I also did an additional content analysis of 422 of the paired assessments that was aimed to look more at what students learned as opposed to just how much. The second question is, what characteristics of the Salmon Heroes program seem to lead to positive learning outcomes for students? Primarily, I used student, teacher, and naturalist interviews. And then I also did some field trip observations for my own contextual understanding. So just jumping in with the student assessments. Question 1 asks students to draw and label a healthy salmon habitat. So in this graph, in red, you have the pre-scores, and in blue, you have the post scores by grade, and the overall assessment score for the whole program on the right here. 83.5% of students increased their score. I did a t-test for each grade, and each grade showed a statistically significant increase. Along the top here is the average point change for each grade. This doesn't increase linearly by grade perfectly, but there is an apparent difference between middle and elementary schools, with all middle school grades showing a higher average point change than all of the elementary school grades. Here you have an example from a previous year of a pre-post assessment from a 4th grade student. What I did for my additional analysis was keep track of the number of times that each feature that would earn a student points appeared in both the pre and the post assessments, so that I would understand which features were appearing more in the post assessments. I created a table. It's on the following page, and it's a little overwhelming, so please don't try and absorb all the information. So in this first column here, you have the feature that I kept track of. The next 2 columns showed the amount of times that each feature appeared in pre and post. Then you have the percentage change from pre to post, and the percentage of students that showed each feature in pre and post. So these top 6 features in green all appeared in more than 50% of student drawings, and there's a really big drop off after that. This is good because these are features that are basic building blocks of salmon habitat, and they're also features that are emphasized the most in the curriculum. I also think it's interesting that they're some of the most obvious features and the most explicit and easiest to point out to students, so they can learn about them and then see them very clearly in person, which isn't quite as true with the others. Moving on to question 2, it's very similar to the first one. It asks students to describe 3 things you can do to protect salmon habitat. So you have the pre-scores in red and the post-scores in blue, by grade, and the overall program scores on the right here. 65.8% of students increased their score. And again, a t-test for each grade showed that each grade had a statistically significant increase. And again, you saw the same pattern where all middle school grades showed higher average point changes than the elementary school grades. And I did additional analysis on this question, similar to the first one, where I sort of coded each student answer based on the category that would have earned them points according to the ESC scoring protocol. And I made a table. It's kind of confusing again. So in green, you have the 4 main learning outcomes. Pick up trash or don't litter appeared the most in both pre and post. And the other 3 green items just showed really large percentage gains. What I want to talk about though is this line, no pollution. So this is when a student wrote the word pollution and was not specific about the type of pollution. This showed a negative change, and I would say that's actually good because there's a lot of specific types of pollution that ESC teaches, like picking up pet waste, reducing the use of fertilizer, fixing gas and oil leaks. So it's good that all of these showed a positive change, while the very general answer that students can't necessarily have an impact on showed a negative change. Question 3 is just a 5-point Likert prompt. Prompt students, there's a connection between where I live and where salmon live. And here you have strongly disagree, disagree, and maybe all decreasing in frequency, and strongly agree and agree both increasing. We also had a substantially larger amount of students who didn't, did answer this, which could indicate that students felt a little more equipped to provide an answer to this question. So moving on to the student interviews, I talked to 1 group of 4th grade students and 4 classes of 6th grade students. There were 2 major themes that came up. First had to do with weather. So again, this happens in the fall, so like October, November, December. And it's pretty likely that students are going to be outside for 3 hours in the rain and cold, which obviously might be a little difficult for them. At the same time, I also saw students jumping around in puddles. So not all of them have trouble with it. The other theme that came up was dead salmon. There's 2 times that students might see dead salmon on the field trip. The first is this picture on the right here, where students have the opportunity to touch the insides of a dead salmon and learn about the organs. I'd say generally, when they first hear about this or first see the salmon, it's kind of like a fascinated horror. But in the end, a lot of the students do end up touching it, and they're encouraged by ESC to do that, but they're definitely not required. The second time is salmon that are in the stream and have spawned. This is a video here that I took that shows some, how close the students are able to get at one of the field sites. And the smell can be pretty strong sometimes. And if you've ever seen spawning salmon, it's also pretty cool. And there are definitely a number of students who thought this was really interesting. I like this quote here from a student. I think it really it's very nice to hear because it felt like he knew exactly what I wanted to hear. Moving on to the teacher interviews, I talked to 1 4th grade teacher and 2 6th grade teachers. Overall, they had really positive things to say about their interactions with ESC and with the Salmon Heroes program. 2 major things came up. The first was transportation. This is just kind of a reflection of funding, and it has more to do with current educational systems and less to do specifically with ESC. But basically, a lot of times it's hard to do full day field trips because the buses are needed to come back early to take high school students home. And so that's where that 3-hour field trip is really useful. And renting extra buses can be super expensive. One teacher said it was $10,000 to take 320 students from just south of Seattle up to the Woodland Park Zoo. That doesn't take into account any admission costs. The other thing that came up was curriculum integration. So all of the teachers are science teachers or talked about science at some point. And they found that their curriculum that was prescribed by the school or the district was general and not specific to Washington. So they liked the fact that the Salmon Heroes program could teach the students about ecosystems and environmental interactions and how humans interact with the environment, and apply it to a more specific thing that the students might be able to relate to more. This picture and the quote along the bottom here are from the 6th grade students who actually didn't get a field trip because of some administrative issues. And ESC was able to work with the teachers and allow the students to do planting at the school and bring some of the aspects of the field trip to the students. And I think this is a really good example of an outside organization being able to adapt their curriculum to the needs of the teachers. And yeah, the teachers had really extremely positive things to say about this. Finally, I talked to 4 naturalists. Again, there were 2 major things that came up. So they had generally a lot of different approaches that they used, different specific approaches. But they kind of could be categorized first into providing a safe outdoor experience. A lot of them recognized that the students who were participating didn't necessarily have access to safe outdoor experiences, and that it might be kind of overstimulating and overwhelming to be a student in this new place. So they wanted to just make sure that students had a good time. Similarly, they wanted to encourage student curiosity. Let nature teach is the ESC motto. What they really mean is that if a student gets distracted by something like a cool bug or a mushroom, ask them questions about that, make them think about it, relate that to environmental science, and maybe try and relate it back to salmon, but don't sternly redirect them away from what they're interested in. So in conclusion, ESC is able to demonstrate quantitative positive learning. They tend to increase student feelings of connection towards salmon habitat and towards the local areas. They're able to integrate the science curriculum for various ages. They're able to adapt their programming, and they're willing to do that with different school needs and to different ages. And maybe most importantly, they're focused on providing positive and safe outdoor experiences for students who don't necessarily get that. So I want to give a really big thank you to everyone on here. Rosie Wilson-Briggs from the Environmental Science Center is my main point of contact and really made all of this possible. And Kevin gave me really amazing feedback and pushed me to become a better writer. Everyone who I interviewed was super helpful, and I really appreciate all of their time. My study buddies, my MES classmates, and my friends and family for being really supportive. And I think everyone in this room as well. So yeah, thank you.
Just gonna stop the recording and then you can take your questions. Oops. How do
We go over it again.
Okay, there it is. Stop recording. I'm sorry. Where is it there? Okay.